Pam Bondi exposes Robert De Niro on live TV. His furious reaction goes insanely viral. No way out content warning. This article contains intense verbal confrontations, political commentary, and themes of public accountability. Viewer discretion is advised. It began like any political face-off. Studio lights, cue cards, a well-dressed Hollywood actor, a former attorney general in heels. The host teased it as a late-night spectacle. A fiery debate, she promised. No one knew what was coming. Robert Darrow sat in his chair like a king, cool, confident, arms folded, a smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. He was ready to deliver lines, not facts. Across from him sat Pam Bondi. Magenta suit, calm posture, eyes like a storm waiting for a crack. The host opened with a softball. Robert, you've called Trump a national disaster. Care to explain? Darrow didn't hesitate. He is. And people like her enable him. A finger jabbed in Bondi's direction. The audience cheered. Bondi didn't blink. Instead, she smiled a slow, deliberate smile. Robert, she began, you praised President Obama for years, even as he deported more people than Trump ever did. But now you mock Trump for enforcing laws your hero once upheld. What changed? Or is this just Hollywood politics? The room quieted. A few heads tilted. Darrow tried to laugh it off. You're parroting Fox News talking points. Bondi leaned forward. I've prosecuted murderers, cartels, corrupt officials. I answer to the Constitution, not a writer's room. The line landed. The audience rippled with murmurs. The host tried to steer. Pam, Robert, let's focus on policy. But Bondi didn't let go. You talk about cages, she said. Those detention facilities were built under Obama. The photos used against Trump taken in 2014. Look it up, Darrow scoffed. You're defending the indefensible. No, I'm defending facts. Policy over personality. You act like every tweet is legislation. It's not. Meanwhile, criminal justice reform done. Tax cuts for working families done. Border security finally prioritized. The audience leaned in. The tone had shifted. The applause for Darrow faded. He raised his voice. Trump divides this country. Bondi didn't miss a beat. And what are you doing right now calling me a puppet, mocking half the country? Is that unity? The host blinked. The tension was real now. Bondi turned her head, voice calm but sharp. Robert, you once said Americans needed to stay civil during disagreements. That was 2009. What changed? Silence. Darrow shifted in his chair. Then Bondi asked the question that cracked the room. Robert, did you ever praise Trump? He rolled his eyes. Don't twist this, she nodded. Because I remember a red carpet interview. You said, and I quote, Trump's shaking things up and that's healthy. That was before your friends turned on him. Darrow glared. That was years ago. Bondi smiled again. Truth has no expiration date. The studio fell quiet. The host whispered to her producer, find that clip. Darrow tried to pivot. You're defending cruelty. I'm defending the truth, Bondi said, and tonight I brought receipts. The screen behind them lit up. A grainy video. Robert Darrow, 2012. Trump's shaking things up, he said, smiling. It's refreshing. The crowd gasped. Darrow frozen. Bondi turned. You didn't always hate him. You once respected that he challenged the system, so which is real? That Robert or this one? He stammered. You planned this. She didn't flinch. I planned nothing. Your words, your face, your hypocrisy. Darrow's voice rose. This is a setup. Bondi leaned in. No, Robert, this is accountability. The host tried to break. We're going to a commercial. Bondi shook her head. Not yet. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folded letter. I didn't come here to gloat, but I brought this in case you forgot. Darrow stared at it like a ticking bomb. Bondi read aloud. Pam, thank you for the conversation. I admire your conviction. We need more leaders like you, even if they don't always vote like me. Robert Darrow, 2010. The silence was deafening. Darrow's jaw clenched. That was private. Bondi nodded. And I kept it private for 15 years, until tonight when you called me a puppet, when you rewrite history for applause. The audience didn't cheer. They just watched. Bondi folded the letter. I respected you, Robert. But I don't recognize you anymore. Darrow stood abruptly. I'm done with this. He ripped off his mic and stormed off. The host sat in stunned silence. Bondi turned to the camera. I didn't come to win a debate. I came to remind America truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be remembered. The clip exploded online before the show had even wrapped. I didn't plan your hypocrisy. That was yours. The line trended worldwide in under 15 minutes. In the control room, the producers stood still. Phones buzzed, editors clipped the moment uploaded captioned. There were no confetti graphics, no anchor reactions, just stunned silence. Across social media, even Darrow's fans paused. The man who usually commanded every room had left it without a word. And Pam. She just removed her mic, nodded at the host, and left with the same calm she entered. But the aftermath. That's when it truly began. Memes came fast, sure, but they weren't mocking Pam, they were quoting her. She didn't scream, she was exposed, she didn't argue, she remembered. Clips spread to every platform, YouTube reaction videos, Twitter threads dissecting every exchange, TikTok duets praising her composure. Bondi's inbox flooded. Journalists, analysts, and former critics sent messages. One read, I disagreed with you politically, but that was a masterclass. Even CNN couldn't spin it. Their headline, Darrow walks off, Bondi stays standing. Backstage producers debated canceling future debate segments. They didn't want another meltdown, at least not one that made their preferred guest look weak. Robert Darrow, meanwhile, released a statement the next morning. Last night was a coordinated ambush. I stand by my beliefs, not past conversations. But no one was buying it. The note, the footage, the red carpet clip. His past praise now public. One commentator summed it up, Pam didn't dig dirt. She showed receipts. 2 nights later, Bondi returned. This time not for a debate, but for a sit-down. The studio was packed. Ratings were triple. The host, still shaken from the walk-off, tried to keep it neutral. Pam, she began, the response to your appearance has been overwhelming. Bondi nodded. It wasn't about a gotcha. It was about memory. You can't rewrite who you used to be. The host asked what motivated her. I've watched people get silenced for less. Called names, canceled, labeled extremists. All for thinking differently. And then the same people calling for civility turn on you like a mob. She paused. I wanted America to see that the truth doesn't yell, it doesn't trend. But when spoken clearly, it lands. Asked about the letter, Bondi said simply, I kept it, because it reminded me that people even in disagreement can be decent. Until they decide, outrage gets more clicks. Then she pulled it out again, the handwritten ink, the dated signature. I never needed to use it, until I realized he'd forgotten he ever meant it. The host blinked. Were you nervous? No, Bondi said. Because I didn't lie. I didn't twist. I was reminded. The host turned serious. What do you think this moment means beyond politics? Bondi didn't hesitate. We've created a culture where outrage is currency, where disagreement makes you an enemy. But I think people are tired of it. She looked into the camera again. Disagreeing isn't dangerous. Forgetting how to disagree, that's the danger. Robert Darrow declined further interviews, but insiders say he was furious. His team pulled upcoming appearances. Scheduled op-eds were postponed. One anonymous source said he thought he was untouchable. Now he's just quiet. But Bondi, her voice carried. Podcasts invited her. Panels quoted her. She didn't gloat, but her words did the work. What most viewers never saw, the footage Darrow never expected would surface. The producers had found it an unaired clip from 2010, a fundraiser. Robert Darrow speaking kindly about leaders on both sides who actually listen. Bondi had been in that room, quiet, observing. The host asked if she remembered that night. Bondi smiled, vividly. That was Robert who signed the letter. Political talk shows shifted. They stopped yelling for a moment. One liberal commentator admitted she played it clean. We need more of that. A conservative anchor declared she didn't just win. She showed us how to win with dignity. Bondi herself stayed quiet. No retweets, no hashtags, just one post. Truth has no expiration date and no script. 3 days later, another envelope arrived from Robert Darrow, handwritten, apologetic. We don't know. Bondi hasn't said. She tucked it away, quietly. And when asked, she only said this: "I didn't speak to embarrass him. I spoke because silence had gone too far. The airwaves were still buzzing." 3 days after Robert Darrow's dramatic walk-off clips of the moment had flooded every major platform, Bondi's calm, methodical dismantling of his arguments and ultimately his persona had become not just a viral hit, but a cultural pivot. Talk radio was lit. Morning shows debated tone versus content. Even Saturday Night Live skipped a parody, choosing silence instead. But behind the virality was something deeper. America was paying attention. Pundits on both sides weighed in. The right lauded her as a disciplined truth-teller. The left was split, some dismissing the moment as stagecraft, others quietly admitting they were impressed. A well-known progressive journalist tweeted, "I don't agree with Pam Bondi's politics, but she just gave the single most compelling on-air performance I've seen in a decade." The White House press secretary declined to comment, but it didn't matter. Because Bondi's message wasn't political theater, it was courtroom logic. She hadn't aimed to destroy, she aimed to expose. And when truth landed like evidence, performance had no defense. Pam Bondi did something unexpected after the broadcast. She disappeared. No interviews, no follow-up appearances. Her team issued no statement. When asked by a major outlet for a comment, her only reply was, "I said what I came to say." She didn't need to chase the headlines. They were already carrying her. Instead, she returned to Florida, to her work, to the quiet. But the country, it wasn't done talking. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, Darrow's inner circle went into damage control. Behind closed doors, publicists argued over narrative spins. Agents pulled scheduled appearances. Endorsements were delayed for reassessment. One leaked email read, "We need to shift the narrative, move him away from politics for a bit." But the internet has a long memory, especially when receipts are involved. Bondi's calm, confident voice had struck a nerve, and the American public wasn't forgetting. On university campuses, debate teams used the interview as a teaching moment. One professor called it a masterclass in persuasive contrast, logic versus emotion, memory versus narrative. A viral TED-style breakdown titled "Why Pam Bondi Won Without Raising Her Voice" hit 3 million views in 48 hours. Panel discussions emerged around a central question: can you separate the message from the messenger? Even those who loathed Trump or Bondi's record had to contend with her precision, her tone, and above all, her proof. Then came a ripple nobody expected. A second letter, not from Darrow, but from someone else who'd been there, a former producer from that 2010 Veterans fundraiser. It read, "Pam, I remember the night you mentioned. I was part of the event team. What you said about Robert is true. He was thoughtful. He listened. We all remarked on it afterward. That was the real him. I don't know what changed, but thank you for not letting that memory disappear." Bondi didn't publish the letter, but she confirmed it. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about reminding a country that memory matters. Eventually, Darrow resurfaced, a carefully managed appearance on a primetime talk show. He was somber, subdued, a far cry from the firebrand who had mocked Bondi weeks earlier. Asked directly about the walk-off, he said, "I lost my temper. I let emotion win." Pressed about the letter, he didn't deny it. "I've had conversations in my life that I now view differently. That doesn't mean I've changed fundamentally." The host asked, "Do you regret calling her a puppet?" He paused. "I regret making it personal." Bondi declined to respond publicly. She didn't need to. For years, Bondi had been a polarizing figure. To critics, she was the voice of Trumpism, firm, aggressive, unyielding. To supporters, she was the wall that wouldn't crack. But now a third image has emerged: the advocate who listened, the prosecutor who didn't flinch, the woman who let the facts speak. She hadn't just countered Darrow. She had reintroduced herself to America. And America liked what it saw. Weeks passed. The frenzy settled. But the ripple continued. Cable news reran the exchange. Documentarians requested access to the footage. Debate coaches rewrote syllabi. And Bondi received invitations to universities, to speak at forums, to host roundtables on public discourse. She accepted one, a national Civic summit titled "Fact versus Fiction: Truth in a Time of Performance." Her opening line, "We don't need more outrage, we need more memory." It was a Saturday morning. Pam Bondi was walking her dog when a woman approached, older, kind-eyed. She paused, nervous. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't vote for your guy. But what you did, it made me rethink how I judge people. You didn't yell. You remembered." Bondi smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The woman nodded. "I didn't change my politics," she said, "but I changed how I talk about them." And with that, she walked away. Bondi stood still for a moment, not triumphant, just thoughtful. Truth doesn't trend often. But when it does, when it's delivered without malice, without fire, just quiet clarity, it can change everything. And sometimes the most viral thing of all isn't the line that wins. It's the silence that follows. The energy had changed. Weeks after the broadcast that left Robert Darrow speechless and the country leaning forward, another chapter was quietly writing itself. This wasn't about clips anymore. It wasn't about who walked off. It was about who kept walking. Inside Washington, the Bondi moment had stirred the political class. Behind closed doors, strategists debated how to counter the viral dominance without reinforcing it. A senior advisor to a liberal senator was overheard saying, "She hit a nerve, not because she shouted, but because she didn't." And within conservative circles, Bondi was quickly becoming a new kind of figurehead, not a bomb thrower, but a scalpel, a strategist, a reminder that delivery doesn't require decibels. Cable networks tried to recreate the lightning. Other programs invited celebrities and political figures for civil debates, but none captured the raw, unscripted moment that had unfolded live. It couldn't be faked. One late-night host remarked Pam Bondi just did more for courtroom poise than a dozen political operatives screaming on Twitter. Newspapers ran think pieces when calm wins. The Washington Tribune, Bondi's Moment, A Study in Silent Strength, Civic Review, Truth or Theater. What the viral clip revealed, the Atlantic Light. Quietly, Bondi's team fielded calls from campaign chairs, documentary filmmakers, even streaming platforms. Everyone wanted the next moment. Bondi refused them all, until one call came from a nonprofit focused on youth civic education. They didn't want a show. They wanted a workshop. Bondi accepted. In a high school auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa, a crowd of 300 students waited. Most weren't old enough to vote, but they'd all seen the clip. Bondi didn't lecture. She asked questions. What matters more, volume or value? A hand rose. Value. Anyone can be loud. She smiled. Exactly. Then she pulled out the letter again, not to brag, but to teach. Words have weight, especially when you forget you wrote them. Back in Los Angeles, Darrow kept quiet. His social media manager paused all posting. His team focused on new scripts, new roles, and less commentary. But the shadow lingered. One anonymous blog post made waves. Darrow's not canceled. He's cornered. The real punishment isn't silence, it's a reflection. Whether it was true or PR spin, one thing was certain: he hadn't recovered the narrative. Bondi hadn't taken it. She just stopped giving it back. Then, without warning, the full letter Bondi had referenced went public. A user on X, formerly Twitter, uploaded a photo of it, verified handwriting dated April 2010. Within an hour, the letter trended globally. The public saw the praise, the warmth, the contradiction. Darrow's signature was unmistakable. Commentary flooded in. This isn't about gotcha, it's about memory. He didn't just forget, he hoped we did. She waited a decade to use this and only used it when attacked. Bondi released a statement. I didn't leak it, but I stand by every word I read. Words changed. Where once the narrative had been outraged, it became nuanced. A headline on a centrist blog read, "What if we talked like this?" All the time. Bondi wasn't trying to unite anyone. She wasn't pushing peace. She was pushing memory. And memory, real consistent memory, was becoming powerful again. Bondi returned to the same set weeks later. Not for a debate, for an interview. Same host. Empty chair across from her. We invited Robert Darrow to return, the host said. He declined. Bondi nodded. I'm not here to rehash, she said. I'm here to talk about what comes next. She laid out a proposal for a new national program, Public Civics Literacy. A hybrid of education and conversation. Less partisanship, more participation. The clip of her interview didn't go viral, but it went somewhere deeper into policy rooms. into school boards, into funding proposals. The storm had passed. But the rain was growing something new. In the weeks that followed, Bondi's commanding live appearance momentum gathered like thunder behind distant hills. The reverberations were no longer confined to Twitter timelines or political podcasts. They had begun to reframe the public's perception of leadership itself. Bondi's office received over 2,000 invitations, talk shows, university panels, international summits. But she was selective. She didn't want sound bites. She wanted substance. She appeared in Florida at a town hall in Jacksonville. The topic, integrity in modern discourse. No confrontation, no opposition, just dialogue. Within a month, Bondi launched a bipartisan initiative called Civic, Integrity and Verifiable Information Exchange. The goal was restore depth to political conversation through workshops, public forums, and student-led debate circuits. The launch event was held in a modest community center, not a hotel ballroom. There were no red carpets, just folding chairs, clipboards, and a whiteboard. And it worked. Within 3 weeks, over 20 school districts had signed up. Law professors, former judges, and media ethicists volunteered. Civic wasn't viral, but it was viral proof built on effort, not outrage. Inside, D.C. strategists tracked Civics quietly. A top aide to a Democratic senator remarked privately, "We underestimated her. She's not building a movement, she's building muscle." Meanwhile, some GOP donors took note, not the loud ones, the legacy types, the ones who longed for a Republican Party that could make its point without making a scene. Bondi's restraint was becoming her signature. Months passed before Robert Darrow resurfaced. A podcast, unscripted, long form. "I let my emotions get the better of me," he admitted, voice lower than usual, "and I underestimated her." The host asked him if he regretted the walk-off. "No," he said, "but I regret not listening more before I reacted." And then he added, "Pam Bondi had the receipts, and I had a script." That line went viral. In October, Bondi joined a university lecture circuit. Topics ranged from constitutional law to media manipulation. She shared the stage with ideological opponents gracefully, firmly. In one packed auditorium, a student asked, "How do you stay calm when you're being attacked?" Bondi smiled. "Because I've prosecuted people who'd rather shoot than shout. Everything else is just conversation." What the public didn't see was the discipline. Bondi's team curated every appearance with surgical precision, no echo chambers, no shout fests. She spoke with progressives, independents, libertarians. She welcomed hard questions. And slowly the narrative around her shifted from Trump defender to institutional watchdog. She wasn't erasing her past, she was reframing her purpose. Mainstream outlets that once avoided her began reaching out. Interviews became more nuanced. Headlines less reactive. The New York Ledger ran a cover story titled, "Bondi's Pivot, Can Civility Win Again?" It wasn't a coronation, but it was a recognition. Then came the Kennedy Center. Bondi was awarded the American Civics Medal not for policy, but for promoting reasoned debate in an era of digital rage. She accepted it quietly, surrounded by students from the Civic Pilot program. In her speech, she said, "Truth doesn't need a trending tab. It needs a home. We can't legislate civility, but we can lead with it." Late November. The call came from the West Wing. A quiet invitation to discuss youth civic engagement with the Domestic Policy Council. Bondi accepted, not to endorse, to advise. The meeting lasted 48 minutes. It resulted in a joint bipartisan grant program to expand civic workshops in underserved communities. While DC insiders whispered about 2028, Bondi shrugged them off. "This isn't a campaign," she told her team. "This is a cleanup," and the public, weary of flame wars and performative outrage, seemed to agree. Approval ratings rose. Even in states she'd never visited, Bondi wasn't chasing influence, she was earning it. The echo of that viral night did not vanish with the news cycle. It evolved, blossoming into something neither party had anticipated, a national conversation grounded in reflection instead of rage. Pam Bondi, once seen through the binary lens of political partisanship, now stood as an unlikely standard-bearer for dialogue. She wasn't a saint. She wasn't universally praised. But she had reminded Americans that fortitude doesn't always come with fury. Sometimes it speaks softly and carries receipts. Weeks after her media showdown, Bondi was invited to moderate a closed-door ethics summit for corporate leaders. She accepted on one condition: the event be off-record and outcome-driven. No cameras, no podiums, just a circle of decision-makers forced to confront the weight of their influence in the digital age. From the shadows of silence came a surprise. Robert Darrow issued a letter, not to the press, to Bondi. In it, he wrote, "I was wrong to let ego override reason. The truth, as you said, doesn't need a fan base, it just needs consistency. I hope to find that again." Bondi didn't publicize the letter. She responded in kind, privately. And for the first time, their story paused not on a headline, but on mutual acknowledgement. The Civic's initiative, once dismissed as a post-viral stunt, proved enduring. Within a year, it reached 39 states, spanning from underfunded inner-city schools to rural districts often overlooked by federal programs. Students debated, parents listened, teachers reported measurable improvements in civic literacy. A national civics challenge followed crowdsourced policy simulations judged by bipartisan panels. The winners were flown to Washington not to be celebrated, but to present their findings to lawmakers. Real data, real voices, real impact. Unsurprisingly, whispers of a future run returned. A passee registered in her name. Pollsters floated her in hypothetical matchups. Bondi, however, refused to entertain the speculation. "I'm not a product," she said at a public forum. "I'm a citizen. I'm doing what citizens should have been doing all along." That quote trended. But more importantly, it stuck. A year after the broadcast, Bondi granted one long-form interview. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't exclusive. It was with a high school journalism club in Michigan. They asked, "What was your proudest moment?" She replied, "The day I saw kids debating immigration without calling each other names." Least proud, one student asked. Bondi looked down briefly. "The years I stayed silent for convenience." Civics was nominated for a Presidential Medal of Freedom in the category of civic reform. Predictably, it faced criticism from both sides. Some said Bondi was capitalizing on virality. Others accused her of softening politics. She ignored them. Instead, she focused on the next set of workshops. Truth, she insisted, doesn't just survive outrage, it outlasts it. In 2027, Pam Bondi declined a governor's endorsement request. The media pounced. "What's your angle?" a reporter asked. She smiled. "My angle is that I don't have one. That's the story." And maybe it was. Maybe that's what made it so rare. In a time of spectacle, she chose structure. In an era of amplification, she chose clarity. In a world addicted to division, she chose civics, not as a weapon, but as a compass. A statue wasn't built, a movie wasn't made, but in 1,000 classrooms, students stood up to speak not louder, but better. And in a quiet hallway in D.C., a letter from Robert Darrow still sits in a file unread by the public, unopened by the press. Because sometimes the loudest truths are the ones we don't shout. Sometimes the stories that change us end in silence. Winter faded into spring, and with it the heat of the viral moment cooled into something more enduring. Pam Bondi's name no longer trended daily. Her face appeared less on cable news, more in classrooms, town halls, and op-eds. She wasn't chasing fire. She was lighting lamps. The Civic program expanded nationally. Over 100 school districts had adopted the platform. Bondi personally visited 23 of them, not to lecture, but to listen. In March, a message came from an unlikely source, Robert Darrow. It wasn't an apology, it was an offer. He was organizing a bipartisan roundtable called Common Ground, pairing voices from opposing sides in civil live-stream dialogue. He wanted Bondi as his first guest. After a pause, she accepted. The two met again on a quiet stage at Georgetown University. No roaring audience, just 2 chairs, 1 moderator, and thousands watching online. Darrow opened, "I came here tonight because I realized that performance can't replace purpose. And because the last time we shared a screen, I forgot that opponents aren't enemies." Bondi responded calmly, "We don't need to agree to find agreement. We just have to be willing to listen longer than we talk." The hour passed not with fireworks, but with bridges. They disagreed on policy, on priorities, on history, but they agreed on the need for truth, decency, and platforms that didn't rely on outrage. The final exchange, Darrow, what's next for you? Bondi, nothing. Viral, hopefully. Just more truth. The crowd clapped not explosively but meaningfully. Weeks later, Bondi received a handwritten letter from a Civic student in Missouri. You made me believe I can disagree without being cruel. My friends and I started a debate club not to win but to understand. Thank you. She kept it on her desk. Pam Bondi didn't run for office. She didn't write a memoir. She didn't cash in on outrage. Instead, she kept building. She understood what many didn't, that in an age of noise, silence can speak volumes, and when paired with courage, it can heal. Her story wasn't about a viral moment, it was about what followed. Because sometimes the most powerful rebuttal to a scream is a conversation, and Pam Bondi had started one.